do.
Does anybody else want to say a word about Rabbi Stanley Davids?
Absolutely.
I'll say something. Thank you, Rabbi, for sharing that information. When I would speak with Rabbi, I could never get him to talk about himself. So thank you so much for sharing some of that background, which I was not aware of. He was always interested in me. He was always interested in other people. And that is a talent, a trait that I would hope to emulate.
May you be blessed with Stan's blessing. And I see, Sue, I see your hand.
Yeah. If you want, you can read some of his bio on the temple in Atlanta. And Rabbi Stan had an ego for sure, but didn't realize until I started reading this what a giant he was. He helped start ARTSA. He was on the board of this, the head of that. I mean, how this man did all these things, I don't know. And yet, as Brad said, and as you said, Karen, he was there for people. And I didn't know about him still mentoring associate rabbis, but he was there for all of us. And I love that he made us feel like Torah scholars. Come on, guys, we're not Torah scholars, but he always said that. And he was always, he could have been having discussions because he was so brilliant with people who were steeped in Torah, and yet he spent his time with us and gave us his wisdom. And I adored him. I absolutely adored him.
Pardon. Sue, Cindy. I see
Yeah,
your hand.
yeah, going with what Brad said, it's all the wonderful things he did in his brilliance, but how he was on a one-to-one, where he wanted to know how you were and how he could help you and to talk with you. I know when I found out I needed open heart surgery after my husband and kids, he was the next person I called. I did talk to Risa at length yesterday, so you all know the memorial service is Monday at Glazer. Then there will be a shiva at their daughter's home outside. So if you go, bring a sweater. She did get a tent. Then Risa is going the following weekend to Washington. Her daughter Shoshana is getting an award there. And then after Passover, there will be burial in Israel, but they're waiting till after Passover when she could really stay and spend time there. She knew it was imminent. I talked to her about 2 hours before he passed, and she knew it was coming at any time. They did have wonderful support from hospice. She said her favorite article, because there are a lot of information, is in the Jerusalem Post, that there's an article about him that she really liked. Just one of the most wonderful people I've ever met.
Was. Merle, I see your hand, and then we'll save the rest of the comments for around Kaddish.
Yeah, I just wanted to say he wasn't just one of my rabbis and teachers. He was a dear family friend, and I was so glad that I was able to see him at the installation a few weeks ago. And it was pretty obvious that it was soon, though he remembered everyone and he had a great conversation with everyone that afternoon, that evening. But it's still, when I got that email, it still threw me for a loop. And I think being at the convention last week where his name was mentioned so many times in so many places was special, not just to everyone who mentioned it, but to those of us who were there that knew him so well. And to come home and have him mentioned here was equally as wonderful, just to know that everyone remembers him for who he was, not just everyone's teacher in one way or another, but just the person that he was and a part of our families.
Lovely. When he and Risa moved to LA after being in Israel, Mickey and I knew them, as I said, for quite a while. We would go out for Mexican food, not something that was on his doctor's list, but he wanted to eat Mexican food. We'd find Mexican food that had vegan or vegetarian entrees and things like that. And that was a very fun way to spend time with him. And he was a real mentor to me. So I'm grateful, and we'll say Kaddish for him after we study. In his, in his good memory, may he the details of the memorial on Monday is 10 o'clock at the Temple campus, the Glazer campus, 3663 Wilshire Boulevard. That's open to the community.
It will be live
who are they
streamed too.
speaking about? I came
I
in
will
late.
write it here.
Karen, it will also be on Zoom.
Yes, it will. And you'll have to go onto the website, Temple website, to do that, because I can't figure that out. Okay. So in Stan's memory, let's do some Torah study. And then we'll keep going at the end with a Kaddish for him and other people. So today's Torah portion is Pekudei. We are coming to the very end of Exodus. And I'd like to read the beginning of Pekudei and then go to the end chapter.
What page?
It's a lot of pages, so I'll give you the pages in a moment. In the Plout, it begins on 627. In Eitz Chaim, we're going to look later at page 571, and later we're going to look at 554 in the Women's Torah. But right now, I just want to give you a bit of an overview.
Excuse me, just the chapter and verse, please.
Well, we're going to move around. We're going to start at Exodus 38:21.
Okay, thank you.
And this, the book of Exodus that began a few months ago, opened with the Israelites serving as slaves in Egypt and closes with this parsha. Pekudei is the end of Exodus, and it is as the Israelites are free people and are they become bound to God only. And they've constructed a unique environment that we've talked about over these last few weeks, the portable sanctuary, the portable tabernacle, the Mishkan, and that's a place for God's presence. So in these different experiences, we've seen God's presence revealed in the cloud, in fire, and in a voice. And we're going to look very closely at that at Exodus 40:36 through 37 in a minute. First, I would like to, does anybody who has the Plout commentary? If you can go to 627 and read a little bit of the introduction. Does any volunteer for the Plout commentary? In their introduction on page 627, David, I see your hand. Will you read this about a paragraph down on the right column?
When the cloud rests?
Yeah, that's it.
When the cloud rests on the tent, Moses cannot enter it. Thus, this tent again seems different from the one mentioned in 33:7. Tradition reconciles this difficulty by comparing the tent to Mount Sinai. Moses could not approach the presence until he was called.
Okay, hang on there. Moses could not approach the presence, meaning he couldn't approach God until God called out for him to come near. And that's an important piece. He's not overstepping his bounds. Moses is conscious of who is God and that he's not. Keep going,
Like
please.
Job.
The cloud also serves as a signal to the people when to break camp and when to remain, and thus God's visible presence will lead them, God's children, by day and by night in all their journeys. On this note, the book of Exodus ends.
So throughout Exodus, thank you, they've been building, but now we're going to end with, well, what is this relationship aside from the tent of meeting or the Mishkan? What's happening there and what will happen? So I would like to take us to chapter 4, Exodus 40, 28.
Page,
In the Plout, that's page 634. Exodus 40, verse 28. And let's read a little bit of the Torah right there. Anybody else have the Plout? Or who's got a different translation? Suzanne, what have you got?
38,
Chapter 40, verse 28.
28, 20.
Rabbi, it looks like Diane Mandel has the Plout. She's raising her hand.
Okay, Diane, go
Okay,
for it. I
then
can't.
he put up the screen for the entrance of the tabernacle. At the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, he placed the altar of the burnt offering. On it, he offered up the burnt offering and the meal offering, as the Eternal had commanded Moses. He placed a laver between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it for washing. From it, Moses and Aaron and his sons would wash their hands and feet. They washed when they entered the tent of meeting and when they approached the altar, as the Eternal had commanded Moses. And he set up the enclosure around the tabernacle and the altar, and put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure.
Okay, so any questions on what's happening here?
Chaplain.
Yes, Sue.
I'm just wondering, a bit off the subject, but why don't we wash our feet before we go into the synagogue?
It actually was an ancient tradition. It's been removed. People not sure when. And the people who still have a foot washing ritual are Muslims.
I know, that's why I'm thinking, did they
Yes.
get that from us and we got rid of it?
Well, I don't know if they got it from us or we got it from people who were desert people. And what does it take to be ready to approach God? And if you're wandering in the desert on bare feet or on simple sandal, what do you need to do in terms of being ready to approach God? Later, Jews developed, I don't know if it's related, but mikveh has always been a very important part of Jewish ritual, going into a body of water at a significant moment in personal moments. Before a wedding, before entering the new year. Some people very observant people go to mikvah before Shabbat. The idea of physical cleanliness or symbolic, it's not taking a bath, it's going into a water that is meant for sacred purposes. Today we use the mikvah when people become Jewish. Other people use the mikvah after a terrible divorce. Sometimes I've taken a woman to after a miscarriage. So water is that transitional item. Thank you for the question. Let's see, David, I saw your hand, then Mara and Harv.
Yes, this portion deals with Moses and Aaron's sons washing their hands and feet. Is there anything else for regular congregants, quote unquote, to wash their feet at this point in time when they enter the tabernacle?
You know, I don't know.
Okay.
Let's see if Cloud has a commentary on that. No. No.
And this deals with when they approach the altar and the enclosure on the tabernacle. So that's pretty holy, special place. So that's
And
what
it was not open to everybody.
right.
In other words, Moses and Aaron and the Levites had work at that tent of meeting, but nobody else really did. You had to be either a Cohen or a Levite to do anything in that space. So it's already saying not everybody had that. Now let me see over here. I don't see anything else, but let's go on. Maybe Mara Harv. Thanks.
Well, maybe something related to that. So when we attend Friday night services, the initial section of the service is, as I understand it, a section that prepares us to pray, prepares us to enter the formal part of the service. So I wonder if, in a way, that is the equivalent of washing our feet before we enter the sanctity of formal prayer.
Interesting. We have Kabbalat Shabbat, which are the Psalms that lead us up to being ready to acknowledge that it's Shabbat time and then say the Baruch Hu. And those are verbal things, they're not physical. Somehow in this portion, the physical was very important. And in observant Orthodox families, the physical of the mikvah, some men go to mikvah on Friday afternoon before Shabbat. One before Shabbat and two before they might have a sexual relationship with their wife that night. So that is again something physical, but certainly the mainstream of Jewish life has removed that physical preparedness. But interesting. On Shabbat morning, it's the same thing. Psukei de Zimra, the songs of the various psalms that are sung again before you get to Baruch Hu. Meaning, what does it take for a person to get ready to approach God? Thank you. Now, would somebody?
Rabbi,
Yes.
what are we supposed to make of the fact that it's Moses here that's doing the work, the labor? How are we supposed to, what are we supposed to read into that? Is that surprising? To me, it's a bit surprising.
Why is it surprising?
Well, I mean, I would have thought that Moses would have delegated that to someone else.
Interesting. Interesting. I don't know. It's also a lot of the focus in this parsha is directed to Moses specifically in having this work. And it sort of is as he enters and gets ready. So I'm looking at the Eitz Chaim. What do you have here? Their translation is slightly different. They place the lavir, which is this water bowl, between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it for washing. So that means it's exclusive to just Moses and Aaron and maybe any other Levites, Moses' sons, but he already had sons who got too close and they were were killed for getting too close without permission. And this is saying only these two.
Well, Aaron
Let's
and
go-
his sons.
Right.
And you would have thought that this would have been in the Aaron line to do this type of work.
It's more like, yes, the Levites doing their prep for the ritual. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you. David.
just briefly, Moses was supposed to be one of the most humblest persons in the entire Hebrew, or maybe even the world. And so he was not above doing some manual work, even something as ministerial as placing a wash basin. And just separately, and I'm wondering, so Moses was rescued when he was put in a mini ark in the basket and floating down the river. And then the Pharaoh's, I guess Miriam put him in that. And then the Pharaoh's handmaiden took him out, and also there's water. And is the lava a mini ark? Is that just a coincidence? But I think there's other situations. Moses did delegate in terms of he delegated to Bezalel, I think, to be the master artisan, and there was all sorts of other delegations, but Moses was not above doing some other manual work. So I think that's a good lesson to all of us who have, higher educations and are more privileged than a lot of other people.
But his father-in-law did point out to him that he had a delegation problem.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, no, that's
there
good.
may be two different ways to read this.
Sure.
Good. And it's interesting. But one of the things that you bring up, David, is his humility. And maybe that is what allows him to say, this is just part of the job. I need to do this at this very moment. We've been working on finishing the tabernacle and getting it ready. And it's right here at the edge of a major transition of the moment in which we're going to see the relationship between God and the people come together here. So I am looking at the Eitz Chaim, page 571. Would somebody read that? And then we'll look at the commentary below the line. Verse 34, chapter 40, verse 34. Or anybody, chapter 40, verse 34. Please read.
Okay, well, I have it from Eitz Chaim.
Yeah.
The tabernacle was to function as a portable Sinai, a means by which a continued channel of communication.
Wait a second. Read the Torah text first. When Moses had finished the work, page 571.
Oh, note 33, you're saying.
Yeah.
When Moses had finished the work, the Hebrew word for finished, vayakel, echoes the same word in a different form, vayakulu, at the close of the story of creation. This is significant because the link between shrines and creation was traditional in the ancient world. It is echoed both in the structure of the tabernacle and in the procedure entailed in its construction.
So part of what the commentator is trying to say is God created the world at creation. And here human beings are creating this tabernacle, this physical space for God as a unique space where God and people can come together. And there's a creative act that was at creation and the creative act of creating the tabernacle itself. And keep reading in the Torah, verse 35, where it says Moses could not enter. or right there, go back to the Torah above the line, when Moses had finished the work.
I don't know where you are.
It was just up in the Torah section where you had the commentary 33, in where the Torah translation is, when Moses had finished the work in the Torah. Second, above the commentary.
That's what I had just read.
No, there's
Let's go on
further down.
a little further down. Natalie, do you see it?
Yeah, I'll read it. Is that okay?
Yes.
When
It is
Moses had,
chapter 40, verse 34 and 35.
okay, when Moses had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle.
Okay, let's just stop there.
Okay.
So, this cloud that had moved with the Israelites throughout the desert and they're coming out of Egypt is now settled upon this interesting, the Ohel Moed that the people built. And the kavod Adonai Malay et HaMishkan, and the kavod of God, the presence, the honor, the holiness of God filled the Mishkan that the people had built. So there was no more room in that Mishkan for even one person, because when the holy presence was in there, there was no wiggle room for a person. Isn't that an interesting idea?
Good.
So why are you laughing? Now let's keep going with the Torah and go to the next verse. 35.
Oh, again, all right. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. That's just what you said. Should I go on?
Going.
When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their various journeys. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. For over the tabernacle a cloud of the Lord rested by day, and fire would appear in by night, in the view of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys.
So when the cloud was resting, they didn't move. If it lifted, the people could move. So there's, do any of you have, I'm still looking each time because they have an interesting comment here.
Mhm.
It's unclear whether the entry to the Mishkan is literally blocked or it's not permissible, or that Moses simply dared not to enter the Mishkan. Maybe he was too afraid. Any other comments in the Women's Torah commentary about that, or in something else you have? Rebecca, I see your hand.
It's not, I understand the concept of the cloud, but it's not clear to me what the concept of the fire is. Where was the fire?
Fire was light in the darkness. Fire is sometimes there are different ways that God is captured, in cloud, in fire, and in a voice. So sometimes if there was fire in the darkness, the people felt safe, that God was there even when it was dark, because that brings light.
So the fire was like an aurora,
Was like what?
like the aurora borealis? It's hard for me to conceptualize it.
That's interesting. That would be nice.
This is Ray speaking.
Yes.
I'm looking at the Plout translation, and it includes in that verse 38 a cloud of, it translates, the eternal rested by day, and fire would appear in, and in this translation, in square parentheses, it renders the cloud by night. But I don't know where that gloss or interpretation or inference comes from, but it seems interesting, at least, that this translator chose to offer that understanding for us.
Well, it's in the Hebrew. Ki anan Adonai ala mishkan yomam, because the cloud of God was on the top of the Mishkan during the day. Ve'esh tihyeh laila, that and light would be in it at night. Le'enei kol Beit Yisrael, so everybody could see it in their own eyes. So
And it sounds like the Hebrew then is something of a pronoun in it by night.
yes, ve'esh tihyeh laila bo, and fire was there at night inside the cloud, bo, inside Anan. So it's definitely in the text. Now, somebody who has the Plout, maybe go below the line where there's the comment on verse 34. Do you have that? This is in the Plout, page 634. Go for it, Sue.
Okay, wait, I gotta, okay. Presence of the eternal filled the tabernacle, fulfilling the promise in 25:8, quote, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, unquote. The promise was fulfilled again when Solomon erected the temple in Jerusalem, quote, when the priests came out of the holy place after setting it up, the cloud filled the house of the eternal so that the priests were unable to remain and perform the service because of the cloud. For the presence of the eternal filled the house of the eternal. Yeah. Is that, you want me to stop there?
I think so. So it's again this notion of God, Shachanti Mishkan, I'm making a sanctuary so I could live in them, or does it mean that I could live in the sanctuary? God's saying, and here, when God is inside that tabernacle, it's God's space, even though the people made it, and people have to be encouraged to enter or to come in that relationship. So if we go again on the Plout to the page across, the tabernacle and its meaning. Brad, I see your hand.
Yeah, I guess I'm just leveraging off of a comment you just made, which is, the fire and the cloud are external signs that God is providing to the people to reassure them. He could have given them internal signs. He could have made them feel the faith, but instead, with free will, he leaves that up to us. So, that's the message to me here, is that God doesn't plant faith in us, that this is something we have to arrive at ourselves.
Oh, that's quite beautiful. Thank you.
Very good.
And it would be much easier if we had clear signs, right? It would be if we went out in the night and we saw the cloud came down on Los Angeles and we would feel we'd be safe. Doesn't work that way. Even a cloud with fire within it would have been nice to have those signs. It's much more difficult to acknowledge what God's presence is. And we have to be much more, perhaps, intuitive to figure where do we have the experience of the divine presence. And it's certainly complicated certainly complicated. Anybody want to read in the Plout, page 635, the tabernacle and its meaning? Somebody have it there?
Chapter and verse, please, if you could do
It's
that.
not the text, it's in
Oh,
the,
it's something else. Oh, sorry.
sorry if you don't have it.
Sorry.
635, somebody in the Plout? Diane.
Okay. The tabernacle, its meaning. The tabernacle was the place where God could be served tangibly by the community. It concretized the basic cult, transferring the divine presence from an immovable Sinai to a movable structure that accompanied the people on all their journeys. The sanctuary was part of God's all-encompassing as well as contracting structure of holiness. It proceeded from God to the creation, and from there to Israel, and within the people from the tabernacle and its court to the inner tent and the Holy of Holies. Here now was God's throne.
Inside this Mishkan. Keep going a little, please.
The erection of the tabernacle was thus traceable to the creation of the world itself. Even as God made the world, so Moses and his helpers made the tabernacle. And the key word, and even as God's work was finished, so was Moses, and both contemplated and saw all the work that they had made.
So that's pretty interesting. Moses and God looking out at their work. Let's read one more paragraph, if you would, Diane.
Put the audio back on. Okay. The climax of divine, is that where I was? The climax of divine exaltation appears as a motif in the Babylonian creation story. Enuma, Elish, and in Ugaritic epics. There, however, other gods or semi-divine humans build the temple, while in Exodus, it is the people who construct the tabernacle.
Okay, so this is our human beings building this as a place for God, and the relationship for God with God developing within this structure. Howard, I see your hand. Thank you, Diane.
I'm just wondering, I think it's very striking that in this whole section, Aaron's name is never mentioned. In other places where it talks about what Moses did, it was always Moses told Aaron to do this, to throw the stick or whatever. And here, we don't even hear about Aaron. What happened to Aaron? What is it? Just they forgot about Aaron, or
what do you think? What are you thinking, Howard? It's a good question.
I'm thinking that this was written by the priests in Jerusalem, and after the Second Temple, they were trying to propagandize the political point that the only place you can worship God is in the temple in Jerusalem, and that all the people from the north don't have any authority like Aaron. And it has to do with who gets money, basically among the priests.
So you see it as an editorial comment in many ways.
Like what's going on now, the government is instructed to take certain words out of the textbooks, and it's going to teach certain lessons that DEI is bad. There's no such thing as DEI. It has to do with propaganda, the exact same thing.
Interesting. I also think it is post Aaron leading the women bringing all their jewelry for the golden calf. Aaron plays a lesser role. Is that Is that part of the comment in the editorial, leaving him out here also? So that's,
He plays less of a role, but the question is why?
and maybe all those things are part of it. Other responses to this? Eric, I see your hand.
Oh, I every time I read the building of the tabernacle, reminded me of the Field of Dreams movie. Like, if we build it, he will come. That's what I hear every time I read it. You know what I mean? Because because you fill the cup. The Mishkan is a cup where you fill your spirit of human beings and the spirit of God. So it's a gathering place for both people. But I wasn't too sure if God needed a Mishkan. But the Mishkan was a visual aid so people can have something to relate to. Thank you.
Raising my hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Okay. Yes, Natalie, and then we're going to read something
Okay.
from the Women's Torah commentary, please.
Perhaps this has something to do with the whole idea that God does not control our own behavior. We're responsible for our own behavior. So we can't come into this tabernacle. We cannot connect in that way. We are responsible for our own actions and what we do.
Good. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Go, if you have the women's commentary, go to page 558, below the line, number 35. Somebody have that? Okay, Mara.
35.
Yes, below the line. Yeah.
At first glance, it seems surprising that Moses and God's presence could not be in the tent at the same time, especially in light of chapter 33, 9 to 11, where God spoke directly to Moses inside the tent of meeting outside the camp, while the cloud hovered at the entrance. However, the present passage concerns the function of the cloud and fire in the journey to the promised land that is about to start up again, not the oracular function of the tent as expressed in Exodus 33.
So this comment may get to that other question we had about the cloud and the fire, that somehow this is going to be a new relationship as we are entering towards the promised land. And we're going to need the fire to be able to move at night to provide direction. So interesting.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
On page 563 in the women's commentary, there's an interesting commentary that talks about the Israelites needing to see something, and then goes on to say, so it is for us. We need not be wary of looking for visual evidence of God's presence in the world around us. Seeking God's presence with our eyes is not idolatrous. It is only idolatry when we know in advance what we will see, when our expectations restrain us. I thought it was an interesting comparison.
It's sort of a human need. I mean, here there were the biblical story says, well, there are physical, concrete things we could do to see God. And here, they're saying, well, there is evidence of God's presence in the world, and looking for it is not idolatrous. It's probably simply because we're human beings wanting to see things like I see you, like I see the plants outside, like I see the sun come up. We want to have some kind of clarification that God is there with us. And I think especially in terms that are difficult, which are times that are difficult, which this really is. And that's, when when there are, we can simply ask, well, when does God appear in your life? And was there a physical sign or a psychological sign or a spiritual change that you saw or experienced God? Anybody? Sue, I see your hand is up.
I'm just going to say that maybe in Christianity, they see Jesus as the representation of God on earth, because maybe that makes it easier for them to conceive of the concept of God.
Maybe. And Judaism at the time it developed was opposing physical
Yeah.
signs of God in Egypt. There were so many idols.
Mhm.
And we're saying, no, we have a God that we can't touch, see, or feel, but we know God is there. It might be more challenging. And yet we want to keep looking for signs of God. Howard, I see your hand.
I think this theme, I mean, it appears in the Jewish writings many times, and there are many different takes on it. For example, the saying, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, blessed is the name of the Lord. That's one concept that says that when the Lord gives, then we thank the Lord. And when the Lord takes away, either version A, we realize that we must have done something wrong, or else version B, no, we just say the ways of the Lord are mysterious. In other words, sorry, bless you. I hope I'm not causing you to cough. That it's complicated. There's no one answer. And in the end, the Torah doesn't really give you answers. It gives you many. You can pick the kind of answer you're interested in finding.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, I've got asthma. And this, there's a young poet, Hannah Yerushalmi, who has brought a poem for this Torah portion that's about this seeing. Excuse me, 1 second. Bring Me by Hannah Yerushalmi. I want to join the ancient multitudes, blessed witnesses to so many glorious signs, a divine cloud to guide the day, a night fire to light up the path. I see none of these miracles through the film of dense ash cloaking my eyes. Bring me a creator who can form these eyes anew, so I can see the wondrous signs of hope that others speak of faith wafting in the mountain air, of truth echoing from the low hills, of kindness in a neighbor's touch, of love from a stranger's hand, of lasting peace from a Shabbat. And as a young writer, she's saying, I want to find these things as signs of God's presence in my life. And I think that's the hope that we all have in many ways, because the Torah portion is really talking about the building of this place that our ancestors made to contain God, but we want to see God not contained outside in the world where God might be present to help make peace, where God could give us a sign, a sign of hope that what's going on now is only temporary, a sign of faith that God is going to be with us through this difficult transition. And I was at the Central Conference of American Rabbis conference this week in Chicago, and a wonderful scholar spoke. He's a friend of Stanley David's, Michael Marmer. And Michael is a professor at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. he gave a paper on anxiety and hope. And that so many times in Jewish history, we are in circumstances that engender anxiety. But there's always, he said, a red thread which comes through the rabbinic line, a red thread that people will hold on to say that can give me hope even in times that are so stressful. And I hope, may we find signs of hope. Here, this Torah portion is talking about seeing God through these physical ways. And the question we have is, where do we experience God's hovering presence? When does it invite us in? How do we create a relationship with God that we can't see? What words do we need? What presence do we need? So I'm conscious of the time. And I also want to tell you one more thing. One of the things I learned about at the conference was the Reform movement right now is in the midst of writing a new commentary that will be spread on like a whole page spread. And it will have the Hebrew text, the English text, a commentary taken from traditional sources, and on the far right, what is the simple meaning of the text? And they're hoping to publish it within the next year or two. I think it will really add another breadth of accessibility to Torah. So I'm just going to read you one thing from it, and then we'll go to Kaddish. This is from Josh Fagelson, who is the head of the Institute of Jewish Spirituality. There's a profound tension at the heart of Torah. How do we experience being truly, deeply at home? From the Garden of Eden to the exile of the children of Israel in Egypt, to the fact that Moses dies and the Torah ends before the people make it into the promised land. The Torah conveys a deep ambivalence about being at home. Moses reminds the people not to get too comfortable in Egypt and not to in the promised land and not to forget how they got there. So we're meant to hold our at-homeness lightly, or perhaps to recognize that deep at-homeness, what I believe is our spiritual capacity, lies as much in our ability to inhabit whatever moment in reality we are fully and mindfully. That kind of balance, holding or apprehending of reality that's not too firm or too weak, but just right, is that which we seek to cultivate through spiritual Jewish practices. While our innate emotional drive seeks to preserve home as we know it, our practices of Shabbat and lighting candles and ritual help us create reflective distance from those drives so we can respond mindfully, wisely, and ethically, and so that God can be made visible in our lives and through our work. And that's a different way of saying, how do we bring God's presence into the world? Through the work that we do, through the prayers that inspire us. And that is really, I hope, a message from this Torah portion. I'm conscious of of time, everybody. So Eric, I see your hand and I'll call on you after Kaddish, okay? So that's where we are on this Torah portion. Thank you for studying it with me. I want to be able to say the prayer for those still captive in Israel. Strengthen their spirit and bring them our prayers that they may be protected from all harm. Implant understanding in the heart of the enemy that they may return the captives in wholeness of body and spirit. Grant wisdom to the Israeli Defense Forces that they may secure freedom for the captives without loss of life. Grant strength of spirit and courage of heart to all the sons and daughters of Abraham and Sarah to release the bonds of captivity and allow us all to live in freedom. They shall call upon me, and I will answer them. I will be with them in distress, and I will rescue them and honor them. And together we say, Amen. So our tradition is to ask those in mourning or experiencing a yard site to rise if you can. I'm going to list all of the names, and then I will rise as well, okay? These are those that have passed away during this past month. Rabbi Stanley Davids, Arlene Gelfand, Herman Jacobs, Harry Croft, Lauren Lux, Mark Slater. We also recall those who died in the line of duty in the United States and also in Israel. These are the yard sites that have occurred during this past week. Max Ackerman, Dave R. Coleo, Goldie Altler, Leonard Scott Barkin, Maxine Bell, Esther Bender, Donya Brzezowski, Eugene Bernstein, William Berman, Anna Chinsky, Sidney Davidson, Marvin DeRoven, Shmuel Dick, Sue Dorff, Arkady Edidovich, Hyman Eller, Ellen Memmott, Norman Epstein, Harry Fagut, Jack Feldman, Raymond Feldman, Robin Feldman, Raymond Fine, Isaac Abram Fogelman, Beth Freed, Bill Gilbert, Arlene Gluck, Donna Golden, Fred Stanley Goldman, Mary Gordon, George Grant, Donald Greenberg, Martin Grover, Louis Gurin, Sharon Ray Hayden, Edith Hecht, Betty Heisler, Pat Jacobson, Leon Janot, Edwin Zygmunt Kahn, Joan Komarov, Barry Kesser, Diane Kind, Doug Klein, Albert Klein, Al Kleiner, Belle Lazarus, Dorothy Levin, Cecile Levy, Sidney Levy, Ida Lieberman, Gilbert Lindheim, Minette London, Susan Mahler, George Mann, Leo Morantz, Louis Myers, Patrick John McCormack, Hugo Melvoin, Dorothy Miller, Judith Miller, Ralph Miller, Hal Minter, Rosanna Michelle, Joseph Mulheim, Herbert Nadich, Edith Newman, Millie Newman, Edgar Phillips, George Pollock, Jerry Price, Morton Pullman, Lou Reisman, Max Renoff, Eva Roman, Bernard Roth, Rena Rothenberg, Marshall Sapphire, Anna Hecht Saltzman, Claire Satnick, Walter Salter, Sarah Schrimmer, Harry Schneider, George Siegel, Jack Silverclide, Morris Silverstein, Martha Rosenblum Zimrin, Wally Sloan, Herbert Sokol, Ruby Gant Springle, Rita Stein, Walter Stern, Dina Taslitz, Stanley Wallens, Richard Weissman, Rose Weinstein, David Wolf, Milton Wolf. And as I said, we recall those who died defending the state of Israel and the United States. Are there any additional names to add? So we join in Kaddish together. Yit Gadal, V'yit Gadash, V'yit Bialma, Dibrak Yurte, V'yamlich Malchute, V'chayechon, V'yomechon, V'chaye, Chobei Israel, V'agalav Yishmat Aviv, Amen. Yehei Shmei Abba Mibrach Ve'olam U'me'omaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh, V'yitpadar V'yitalal Shmei Kedusha B'richu, Ve'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata, Tushbehata Benechamata, Daniel Bialma Vimru Amen. Yehe Shlama Rabba Min Shemayim Alenu Bialkoch Vimru Amen. Osher Shalom Bimrama. Huya Osher Shalom. Alenu Bialkoch
Shalom.
May God bring peace into the heavens, bring peace into our world, into our homes and our hearts, and together we say, Amen.
Amen.
So if anybody else would also like to say something about Stan Davids or anybody else who was on the list today, I'm here. Eric, I see your hand.
I was with him in Central Synagogue. I'm a member of Central Synagogue, and he was a good teacher. He did the Torah class many years ago, and he was a fantastic teacher, and a mensch and a half.
And a mensch.
And a mensch and a half.
Exactly.
And also, I want to tell you something. I go to two Torah classes on Saturday. I start with Central Synagogue Mishkan, which is a combination of a service and Torah study. They do 90 minutes, so they divide it into two parts: the ritual and the Torah study. And a couple of rabbinic interns teach the class. This was created by Rabbi Auerbach, which was our director of education in there, and also Rabbi Buchtal. So both of these very intelligent people so instead of ritual all the time, we incorporated Torah class and there's rabbinic interns coming out of HUC are fantastic.
And that's great. And they good training, and you help train the intern. So thank you for telling us about Stanley.
I just wanted, and also was the gathering place because I'm disabled, so I can't drive anymore. I'm in Florida half the year and half in New York. I hire drivers to myself so I can get around and shop when I'm in Florida. But in New York,
glad you can study with us in Los Angeles. That's great.
You know what I mean? I just Zoom is great because I can't drive no more. Doctor's orders because I had strokes and everything. So I like Zoom, so I don't have to get in the car to drive to the local temple. Who doesn't? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad you're here, and I hope Stanley's memory is a good one to hold on to.
Man, it's a shock for me. Thank you.
Mara and Harv. Mara?
Harvey and I met Rabbi Davids in Israel when University Synagogue had a tour of Israel. And so he and Rabbi Morley Feinstein led that. And it was really the beginning of a long friendship. And I think I feel as many other people do here. We knew he was a great rabbi, but we also knew he was a great, great human being. Yeah. And he always used to ask me about the poems I would write, and he was always so anxious to know what I had written lately.
That's lovely. Thank you. I see Rebecca, and
I miss him.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy that you're here to take his place.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, he was a great man. Thank you. Ray, I see your hand.
He really was a great man. And it's interesting for me. I knew Rabbi Stan only for about the last 8 years or so. And so it surprised me a little bit to hear people talking about his ego, because I believe that by the time I came to know the rabbi, he had tempered, as that's, or my impression one way or another. I don't experience him as somebody who was egotistical. I experienced the other side that we also heard. I think it may have been Susan who observed that he would approach us and dignify us with the notion that we were Torah scholars, when of course we were nothing of the kind. But I also thought that that was a beautiful gift and a constructive gift from him as a teacher, because it emboldened us to make our stumbles and our foolish half-baked observations, which is how you get to better observations. And he made this a very safe space for that. And I also think, as I contemplate this prideful, egotistical Stan that I at least don't believe I've met, I recall his telling a story to us about when he was a young rabbi and things he would say to the congregation that now he regrets and wishes that he had handled situations differently. But I do observe that often he indulged in something which now I'm wondering whether there was a little self-parody there, where he would, if someone would say a kind word or a compliment, and he would very broadly, like vaudeville, lean forward and say, "What was that again?" and ask for the compliment to be repeated, but with such a twinkle that I think there may have been a life journey there where he was reconciling younger egotistical Stan with a more nuanced perspective now, and perhaps offering for us a little self-parody of prideful Stan with a little note of later wisdom, understanding that he had that innate trait somewhere in him, and he now saw it as something to make fun of rather than to serve.
You know, he, like all of us, we learn as we go, and he was honest about sharing it. So may that be your blessing and mine. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else have a comment you want to make? And then we'll wrap it up for the day.
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yes.
Back in 2018, my father passed away, and Rabbi Stan did not know my father. And the funeral was in Costa Mesa, and he and Risa went to the funeral. He didn't preside at the funeral, but he went there, and that sticks with me. He really was a mensch. And he, at that time, we had known him for maybe 6 years through Torah study. And what he did, I'll always remember. He was a good person. That's what I want to say.
I think that whenever I would post something about the girls and dance, our granddaughters, he would always send me an email like, what have they, or ask on Torah study, what have they done this week? We all need to know what these kids are doing and what their commitment is. And I think that was part of his wanting to make sure he was a part of everyone's lives.
Yep. Yep. Well, may his memory be a blessing. And the memorial is on Monday at 10 at the Temple campus.
It's also being live streamed, but I don't know how to post that live stream thing. I can't.
The live stream, go onto the Temple website.
Right.
And if you can't reach it, then call the Temple. Try it out beforehand, okay? So I want to thank everybody for being here, and may Stan's
Thank you.
Thank you.
a blessing.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
Everybody.
Take good care.
You too. Feel better.
Thank you.